What about the Eurozone and the debt? Now, this is a very awful graph because it gives you the external debt. So what is external debt? This is debt of corporates, of sovereign, of banks, so public and private debt, towards non-resident, okay? Towards non-domestic holders and the domestic banks. And what you see is that the numbers are crazy, especially for someone who comes from emerging markets like me. I mean, when you look at that, it means default. Because if you look at the numbers of what was Argentina in 2001 and was Russia in 1998, the years of the default, you see that what is 62%, where you see that Spain, if I take one example, is 200%. So clearly, we have to deal with a level of debt which is much, much higher than when emerging markets were in crisis. So we have to take that into account. So, of course, if you just take that graph like this, it's clearly a nightmare. Now, what the good news, in a way, is that this debt is to non-residents, but it's to Eurozone members. In fact, what we see is that European banks that are exposed to sovereign debt or banking debt, meaning that the Spanish banks are exposed to Portuguese debt, the Portuguese banks are exposed to Spanish debt, and so on. So in fact, we are all stuck together. It's a chance because in a way, no one can go out of the Eurozone. If, for example, Greece decides to go out of the Eurozone, it means a wave of default, not only of government, but of banks, of corporates, because of course the new drachma will fall, and then the country will not be able to pay its debt, and then you will have a banking crisis. You might say that Germany might want to go out of this mess. They certainly do not have any interest to do so. Germany is an export-oriented economy. If they go out of the Eurozone, their exchange rate will rise very much because it's supposed to be the zero-risk country, so all the capital will go to Germany, their Dutch mark will rise, their export will fall, so they will go in recession. So in a way, everybody is stuck together. So this is why I don't think that the Eurozone will collapse. And this is why, by the way, everybody struggles to make this glue all kept together. Now, I think, yes, there is a big risk of restructuring, and I don't think that because we have decided for a swap, that restructuring will be avoided. You remember, unfortunately, I was discussing that with Claudia, that when Argentina defaulted some weeks before, they had put in place the kind of swap we are putting in place for Greece. So there is clearly a risk, but I think that if there is a restructuring, it will be a kind of agreed restructuring, because the chance, again, is that it's between ourselves, between mostly big European banks players, the European government, and then in a way we can agree. It will be much easier than with Argentina. When you're Argentina, you have a lot of different creditors. So the fact that the creditors are concentrated is in a way a chance to make a kind of restructuring a little easier, at least agreed. I don't say it's going to be easy, but at least we may be a little optimistic, and it may take place. So this is why I'm not that pessimistic. What I want to also say about this sovereign debt is that it's not only a sovereign debt problem, and I think it's very important for Spain. Because before the crisis, the Spanish sovereign debt was very low. The same with Irish sovereign debt. What happened in Spain or what happened in Ireland is a private debt bubble. And I think this is very important for the future. If we want to be very careful about, if we want to put in place a new stability pact, we don't only have to focus on sovereign problem, on public finance. Not all European countries are Greece. Meaning by that in Greece, clearly, it's a problem of managing the public finance. But it's not the case in Spain. The case in Spain is a problem of how do you watch and how do you monitor private debt? And because eventually private debt becomes a public debt when it goes through banks. And this is why it's extremely dangerous. So this is why if we want to keep Europe on its feet, we have to make a kind of monitoring of private debt bubble. I think it will be absolutely crucial for the future. So then, again, private debt can be in some cases at the origin of the problem. And of course, you go from private debt to sovereign debt, but you also go from sovereign debt problems to corporates, and that's our problem in Coface. That's what we're looking at. So what will be, yes, we believe that there are lots of channels of transmission between the sovereign crisis and the corporate problems. One problem, of course, is recession. Okay, you have very low growth in Spain, but at least it's positive growth. You will have negative growth in Portugal, negative growth in Ireland, negative growth in Greece, meaning that the environment for corporates will be more difficult. The second element is the austerity package. You increase taxes on many corporates, of course, that's a weight on corporates. But again, the most important channel of transmission for me is through banking credit. One of the problems is that many of these banks are loaded with sovereign exposure. This sovereign exposure needs now more capital, so it means less availability of credit. And what's happening now in Ireland, for example, is that you will have a lot of bankruptcies because of lack of credit. The banks are in such a shape that they cannot grant credit. And it's a big shame, because you see the cycle of credit. Normally, we should be at the bottom and we should go up again to make growth coming back. And it's not possible. And the big fear for me is that these kinds of things, of course, it's in these 4 countries, but it may happen in Germany, it may happen in the UK, it may also happen in France. France, for the moment, the credit is okay. It's a little positive, but it may be reversed. So clearly the idea of a non-availability of supply of credit is something that's going to be absolutely crucial, and that's a key element of risk. So what about the country risk and the way it's evolved? Now, of course, this Eurozone crisis has been a big event for not only for you and for companies, but also for economists, because we didn't see it coming. It's exactly like the Middle East. It was a big surprise. And I think we have to work to do our homework and to understand why us, country risk, people who are supposed to look at what's going to happen, why did we completely miss it? And I think you have to understand that country risk was made for emerging markets. You know, the first event of country risk has been the Russian default on the Tsar debt. So that's why country risk has developed. And it has developed for emerging markets. It was not supposed to be developed for hard currency countries like a Eurozone country. And what I want to say is that what is an emerging market? An emerging market is a market that cannot get its debt in its own currency. It has to get its debt in hard currency. And this is why, and all the country risk has been made according to this problem to track how far this foreign debt is too high, and then you can go to a default. Foreign currency, of course, the obligation of foreign currency is called in our language the original sin. An emerging market cannot get debt in its own currency. So it's a little less clear these days. You have more and more domestic currency debt, but still, most of the debt is in hard currency. The problem is that in the Eurozone, the debt was in euro. It was in the local currency. So this is why we didn't look at it, because it was in the same currency. No exchange rate risk. So at least no risk. And this is why now we have to be very careful about that, because now we see that this is why, by the way, both the lenders and the borrowers were not careful enough, because it was in euro. Everybody was blind because the currency was their own currency. And of course, this is you say it's obvious, but it's not that obvious, because again, for us, I mean, the country risk people, we are completely obsessed with exchange rate risks. And we missed, in fact, the domestic currency issue. We are completely blind by the original sin. And of course, the fact that the debt was in euro was a big incentive for entities, not only for governments in Greece, but also for private players we saw in Spain or in Ireland, to get its debt and to get heavily leveraged. So this is very important. The second element that we have to think of, and I think it's a lesson of emerging market crises that we've had before. When I was living in Russia in 1997, and everybody was saying Russia will never default on its debt. Why it will never default? Because it's protected by the IMF, too big to fail. Of course, Russia defaulted, as you know. And what's happening in every crisis is that everybody thinks that there is something like an implicit guarantee. In a way, someone will not default because it's protected. We don't know exactly how. It's not written somewhere. So this is why it's implicit, it's not explicit. And of course, when the problem happens, this implicit guarantee completely disappears. And this is exactly what happened in May 2009 when Greece started to think. Before May 2009, everybody would ask me, do you think that a Eurozone country can go in default? I would say, no, of course, it will be protected. But by whom? Well, European Commission, Germany, ECB, I don't know much. And then suddenly, when May 2009 happened, I began to read the treaty. And when I read the treaty, it was awful. Because in fact, when you look at what's explicitly said, it said, but no borrowing to a country that fails. It's forbidden by the... So we completely missed the thing. And again, I mean, if you look at, for example, Dubai World, what happened with the Dubai corporate, all the lenders lent to Dubai World because they were thinking it was protected by the sovereign. But when Dubai World defaulted, they said, well, in fact, you were wrong. We are not sovereign, we are just a corporate. But you told us that you were sovereign. Yeah, you thought you heard that, but no. So it's always the same story. Again, we have to be very careful about implicit guarantees. Implicit guarantees, of course, when there are crises, they are completely stopping. And this is why, by the way, we had too much confidence in Greece, but then after the crisis, we have too much defiance, because in a way, when a psychological belief explodes, then you go from excessive trust to excessive distrust. So this is why, of course, so it's very important for Europe to build now explicit mechanism, and that's what we are trying to do now, explicit foreseeable bailout mechanism. I want to say also one thing, and I will stop here, because I think I'm out of my time, is that everybody talking about the amount of money we are going to put on the table for Greece, for Ireland, or for Portugal. This is very well. But when you look at the past crisis, when you look at Russia or you look at Argentina, the defaults do come from the tiredness of government and of population. 1 year of program, it's okay. 2 years, it's hard. 2 years and a half, it's very difficult. And for the population, for the government, they are under a lot of stress. And a lot of time, what can happen is that what we call reform fatigue, and the good word in English, at the end, we just stop and then you go into default. So it's very important to look at what's happening now in Greece within the coalition or within the population with strikes, because there you might have a problem, is that the fact simply population governments cannot do it anymore. And this is what we have to be very careful. This is the big lessons of emerging markets. So I will stop here, and thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot.